Greetings in the love and light of the one infinite creator. I'm Andres Vorrigan, and joined here with Simon, Michaux, and Iver. And we will be doing a presentation and continuing our peak oil and transition discussions. And then I will be doing a presentation summary. But first, Simon has a few updates he had to share. Go ahead.
Oh, right. Okay. So first thing to note is my big papers that are going through a peer-reviewed journal have been past peer review, as in they've been authorized. So 2.5 years in process. And so all the sort of, then I'm about to release into peer-reviewed space. What's left is for me to actually go and work with the people who do the formatting for the second paper. The first paper's done, and the second paper, and it will come out as a special edition. In fact, I can actually, if I can, hang on, cancel. I can actually show you what the cover looks like.
Sure.
So let me just pull that up. Now, I've also been working on, here we go. All right, let me share screen.
Go ahead.
So you guys are actually the first in the world to hear this. So there you go. Can you see it?
Yeah, estimation of the quantity of metals to phase out fossil fuels and a full system replacement compared to mineral resources.
Right, and so this is actually coming out. It's going to be a special edition just for this. And this is the front and back cover. And so it hasn't been released yet, but we've got to go through the format. It's been authorized. So that's actually... Wow. That's actually a relatively that's hang on, where am I sharing? Yeah, good. So the other thing to report is I've been working on what's called the Hawaii report, and things have progressed. And how things so I've been looking at human sewerage. Now we talked about the combustion of iron powder, and that's actually holding up as a fuel that could actually be useful to bring in high-end heat. The question is, can we recycle that powder instead of making new stuff? And the answer is yes. Now, there's a couple of ways to do it, but which one's sensible? This is actually an idea I actually got picked up from talking to you, Andrew, is using syngas made from sewage. Right. And so I'm going to reference you as a personal communication in the document. So, yeah, anyway, so syngas through the pyrolysis of sewage, and we'll use the heat from a thorium molten salt reactor to get most of the way through the pyrolysis, and the final stages will be done by burning some of the syngas to get the higher temperatures to make sure it all gets pyrolysis and everything. Then we'll clean out, then we use the syngas to actually recycle the iron powder. Some of that system is looking like the best way to make hydrogen, right? Because there's hydrogen. You've got to clean out the carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. So if you use the Solway process to actually mix the carbon dioxide with carbonate, and you end up with you mix that with sea salt, and you end up with soda ash, and that can be used to balance soil chemistry and pH and all that. So that fits in nicely. So yeah, so we've got a couple. Yeah. What?
Oh well, I just had a question from YouTube, and they were wondering which journal it would be published in.
GTK Bulletin.
GTK Bulletin, and it's past the peer review there.
It will set a fire so hot and so large it cannot be put out.
That's great.
Yeah, and so
just like the iron powder.
Yes, and once lit, it's going to be very hard to stop.
Yes.
Anyway, so what was this? So the sewage is now looking sensible to split that sewage into several streams, and one of the streams will put it into our digesters and make methane, and use that methane to cooking gas in domestic houses. Now that's yeah.
I was just thinking, before we get into depth on this, perhaps I can do the intro
Yeah,
presentation
sure. No worries.
for people.
Yeah, no worries. Anyway, this stuff's
okay.
happening. It's all over the place. It's all good.
Okay, great. So here I will just share my screen. And are you guys seeing it over here?
Yep.
Okay. Here, let me try to zoom in a little. Okay. So yeah, this is the usual presentation for those who are new. And so basically GDP is directly correlated to energy, and using energy produces heat. And so if we continue both our energy growth and GDP growth, then we'll eventually reach to boiling oceans and the temperature of the sun. Now, obviously, humanity won't survive that long. So basically, that's the imperative that we need to slow down. And the urgency of global oil depletion is actually a good thing, because we'll run out of resources. Now, Rystad Energy released this report in June of 2023. And so one would think that they would release the updated one already, now that it's July, but they have not yet. And that may be because they don't want to put that there's only 7 years remaining. But also, I would like to add the caveat that while there may only be 8.5 years of oil left, we still have, like, say, about a decade's worth of natural gas converted and coal converted to oil remaining. And we are actually already doing that with some of the natural gas liquids are being converted into our gasoline. Okay. And so in terms of renewables, they're unreliable, and currently they only make up, like, was it 5% of our current grid? Something like that. And so we would have to reduce our consumption by 20-fold to make it enough. And just to have an idea of what it means to have less energy, so there's this EROI. So 14, we have enough for the arts, and that was back in the 90s. And then 12 is enough to pay for healthcare, which was in, like, 2010s. Like, right now in the 2020s, we still ostensibly have a healthcare system. However, it is not very effective, and it's very expensive. Um, so most people are not able to get decent healthcare, and enough to pay truck drivers or farmers. This is the essential one for keeping our cities stocked with people, because if we can't pay our truck drivers and farmers, we won't be able to stock the grocery stores, and that's kind of a collapse scenario right there. And so that's projected to be in the 2030s. Now, nuclear is a great option, except that our reserves are highly limited. And so because it takes billions of years to make, and if we were to try to transition again, we would only have for about enough for a decade and a half at most. And I remember seeing Simon was doing a presentation by it, halfway through the transition we would run out of reserves. So we really need to ration it, say for instance for industrial use only, to, like, make for example solar panels and microchips or something like that. Now, here's a basic idea of how collapse resilience and transformation in complex societies. This is based on the Tainter model, as well as updates on it. So basically what we have is exploitation phase and conservation phase. So exploitation phase was, say, the early part of the Industrial Revolution, where we had plenty of fuel resources, like, say, the 20th century. Most of the 20th century was in exploitation phase, and now we're currently in conservation phase. We've kind of reached the peak of our civilization. Actually, that was in 2015. One of the earlier graphs showed that 2015 was the peak net energy, because we had the lowest global food prices, and since then they've been rising. And so now we've gotten to the peak, and now we're somewhat a little bit past that. And then we may eventually, within the next couple 2 to 4 decades, get to the release phase. And then there's the reorganization phase, which is kind of optional. So it really depends. And so some people skip from the conservation phase to the reorganization phase. And for example, in the Bronze Age collapse, there were 6 different civilizations, and only one of them managed to get to reorganization phase, and that was Egypt. And that's because they had a tree planting program. So basically, the trees were the source of energy. And so since they had a way of replenishing their energy through a tree planting program, and that can work for us as well in the now. The most probable lifestyle. So in the urban, it's going to be salvage economy. In the near rural, there's the rustic Amish. So the salvage economy can take pieces of scrap and then bring them to rural areas to make them into rural implements. However, the rustic Amish is a very difficult lifestyle because it's annual tilling, and so their life expectancy is only 56. Indigenous hunter-gatherers, however, they only work 4 to 6 hours, and so their life expectancy is 70. And food forest communities 89 plus because everything is on site. And here's carrying capacity and an understanding of that, and then growing firewood through coppicing. And so this is an example village over here. So these are like hamlets, optimal amount of people 50 to 60, and then they have a central processing facility with the sewage, which Simon was just talking about. So bio CNG can be made from village waste, and then solar wind for residential, and then biogasoline at the neighborhood level. And this is where you would have, like, say, a gasifier, and the gasifier makes the syngas. And then the syngas can be converted into gasoline or diesel, or it can be used for reduction operations, such as turning iron oxide powder into iron. And then you can also have thorium nuclear at the municipal level. Now, in terms of the sustainable energy storage, while it is possible to store energy in various ways, we simply will have 20 times less energy than we have now. So that's just something to keep in mind. And family offices are one of, if you are looking into doing this, teaming up with a family office is a good idea. Okay. And I made a few updated graphs here for Hawaii and China and Russia. Here, if we go to my blog here. So you see here, basically Baltic and Nordic nations like Finland is well within its carrying capacity, but like Latvia and Lithuania is over. And then Russia is fairly well within its carrying capacity in most of it. But Ukraine before the war was over a carrying capacity, and Belarus is arguably over. And let's see, Australia and New Zealand is well within carrying capacity. China is 400 to 200% over carrying capacity, and North America is within it, except Mexico. And I think that's maybe why we're seeing so much immigration out of Mexico, because they're 106% of carrying capacity. And then England is over as well. It's over 200% over carrying capacity. British, and then this is for Hawaii, and Hawaii is well within its carrying capacity, so they can do a sustainable transition. And then here's for the EU. The EU is also over carrying capacity, and that's maybe why they're at war, because historically in Europe and in many places, when they reach carrying capacity, they want to reduce their population, and they often do that through war. Okay. All right, so that was my little presentation blurb. Okay, so you also got a congratulations for having your papers reviewed, Simon.
Thanks. It's been a long, hard road on that one, and
Yeah.
we're not actually there yet. But the gate's been opened, so yeah.
Well, that's great. So I have a question here. Are these carrying capacities with or without synthetic fertilizers? Because we won't have those if we lose complexity. Yes, yeah. Those carrying capacities are without synthetic fertilizers. That's based on average yield, kind of on like using organic methods. Okay. Okay, so what did we want to
May I ask
discuss?
a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Andre?
Go ahead.
Um,
Go ahead.
I'll get to Simon after. I just wanna so
Okay,
I keep
sure.
this in mind. You showed the ROI chart with that 2020s. It's about 10. How accurate is this? Is because I mean, for example, some of these oil nations that have a lot of oil, they're not sharing their exact details. So how close can we say it
Oh,
is?
okay. How close are we to this Eroy? Here, hold on. Let me try to get to it. Just lagging a bit here. So the Eroy numbers are from the book by Alice Friedman, and I think Simon would vouch for her. Yeah, and which was When the Trucks Stop Running.
Excellent book. The other
Yeah,
one she wrote is Life After Fossil Fuels. She
yeah.
takes
It
a
might
very,
have. Mhm. It might have actually been from the Life After Fossil Fuels book.
yeah.
Yeah.
This is a hotly debated topic, and there's been
Mhm.
some papers released recently that have corrupted the ERO debate because now there's no agreement on how it should be calculated in peer-reviewed literature, which proves how it's bullshit. But yeah, and so I actually step around it by not using energy return and energy investment. Actually, go straight to outcome. This is the outcome that we need to deliver, and this is what we need to do to get to that outcome. But yeah, Alice does good work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then regarding the thorium, this is for Simon, and also I want to congratulate regarding the papers and the process. It surely has been quite heart-wrenching. So I noticed that in Alice Friedman's website, I checked thorium, and she was sort of criticizing it, mentioning that the Oak Ridge laboratory had massive, like 200, I think, shutdowns. So were they? So can you elaborate on this and how is it today with the
So
Copenhagen Atomics and all that?
the Oak Ridge system that was at the time was a research reactor, and so what they would do is they'd shut down and run a different experiment, right? And so there were 6,000 hours of power generation with that system, the last system they used without incident. Now, you also have to remember there is a colossal amount of disinformation put out there. There's an incumbent industry that's trying to kill off any discussion of thorium. And there is information from official sources out there that is wrong, that is actually demonstrated to be wrong. And so it's really hard to untangle this and get to the bottom of it. There are a few questions with regard to thorium, which apparently have been resolved. Like, how do you deal with the corrosion problem from radiation, corrosion of metal parts? And Copenhagen Atomics claim that they just need a maintenance cycle where every 5 years they'll come and strip out all the parts and replace all the parts in the reactor, and that will solve that. But is that true? Well, no one knows because we haven't actually seen it yet. So the Japanese reactor for the Fuji, that ran for 30 years. That was also a research reactor that they shut down several times and then conducted an experiment, started up again, and all that. So untangling what's real and what's not with regard to thorium is really difficult, as in which official report do you believe? So the 1972 report from Oak Ridge Nuclear Laboratory says that everything it worked. It worked, and yes, there were some technical things to work out, but actually said it worked and was viable. And they were requesting more funding to do it, and that's when it was knocked on the head. So, but there are multiple groups around the world that are actually producing these. I think there's a lot of people who disagree with the idea of thorium in general, and I think Alice is one of them because I think she's of the opinion that the systems are too complex. But the challenges of things like when peak oil hits, like the value chain of and all sorts of things are just going to collapse. And when that happens, anything industrial is just going to go. And so that is a school of thought. And the reason I like the thorium MSRs is their value chain is much, much smaller and shorter than your conventional nuclear. Which one of those schools of thought is correct? Well, that's open to debate. And certainly in certain parts of the world, we will see an absolute fragmentation of the value chain. So, yeah. And so will thorium work? Well, it is. We think it'll work in certain conditions, but will those conditions still be valid once peak oil really bites us in the ass? Yeah.
Okay. I've had the same concerns due to, again, I mean, I don't even want to imagine the supply chain on how many different continents and how many manufacturers. So to be able to have a map, maybe all the thorium manufacturers should map out their supply chain and see how that could work in a simplified world.
Most of the materials in a thorium reactor are mainly stainless steel and nickel alloy or Hust alloy. Yes, they're specialist systems, but you don't need that much of it. And these systems will run for 50 years once they're actually sort of established. Right, and so they're small and they have a high return on investment. They're a level of complexity equivalent to a 3-bedroom kit home. I've actually sort of looked inside one of these things, and it didn't look that complicated. The factory that I saw was gearing up to produce one of these, one a day, and I thought that was quite reasonable based on what I saw. So now that's just one company. There are others out there that are doing the same thing. I like to talk about Copenhagen because they let me in the door, and they let me take a picture of me standing in front of one of the units. So. But there's lots of them. There's more than one, and it would be foolish to say that these systems don't have challenges in front of them. Like there could be scale-up challenges, and it might be a case of yes, some of them will establish, but not very many, because of the value chain problems. But the challenges and bottlenecks in front of a thorium system is far, far less than many of the other technologies I'm looking at scale.
And how about the legal issues? Oh, sorry, Andre, you had your hand up if you want to say something. Otherwise, I would have questioned Simon a bit further.
Andre, you're muted.
Thank you. Generally speaking, thorium is found along with uranium. So wherever we have high uranium supplies, such as Canada and Kazakhstan, then we're also going to find high thorium supplies because they're kind of like co-emergent. And the supplies, there's about 3 times more thorium than there is uranium. So it is a substantial amount, but considering that we only have like 150 years of uranium, we may have maybe 700 years of thorium, but still we want to avoid that blip scenario, right? And so the kind of what's interesting also is that not only is Ontario have a lot of uranium and thorium, but it also has a lot of nickel, which is great for making Hastelloy N, which is like 80% nickel. And that is one of the best substances to make the thorium molten salt reactors because it is the least likely to corrode from the high temperature thorium salts spinning around in there for 50 years. And then, so we still need to, even if we have nuclear, we still need to reduce our usage of energy 10 to 20 fold, at least in the developed world. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's not a something that can replace our current usage, but it is something that can allow us to continue to have at least some limited industrial production, such as making solar panels and silicon carbide chips into the future. Okay, go ahead, Milo, with your. Okay,
I did some calculations of how long would the thorium reserves last. Resources. Sorry, it's a waste product at the moment. No one's really interested in thorium. Thorium's a waste product in most rare earth mine concentrates, and there's a lot of it. So I took the estimated resources, summed them together, and if all our electricity was to actually come from nuclear, all of it, based on the latest calculation of electricity consumption, our uranium resources reserves all the way out to unconventional resources would last 29 years if everything came from uranium nuclear. But if we did the same thing with thorium, because of the nature of the systems are very different, almost all of the fuel is used instead of a tiny fraction of the fuel is used, which means the thorium resources that we think we've got, and it's a very rubbery number, last around 1,300 years. If you were to actually mix the uranium and the thorium together in a molten salt environment, right, and then did the same thing, now we're going to push out to over 6,000 years. So the bottleneck's not the source of fuel. The bottleneck's the ability to produce the reactor and the technology associated with that reactor and the value chain associated with that reactor. And that, I believe, is the crunch that will force a 10 to 20-fold reduction in energy and a reduction across the board of what we do and how we do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great assessment, Simon. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying for sure. And basically the small modular reactors with the molten salt, whether it's uranium or thorium, much more energy efficient. Though personally, I think that ideally we should be aiming to keep these reserves for millions of years.
Oh,
But
yeah.
thousands is already great. Yeah.
The whole system has to be scrapped, and we've got to start again to completely different mandates and do things. There's a very compelling story out there that a school of thought that SMRs produce much more waste than the larger reactors, and SMRs are expensive. I think a lot of what that is SMRs in solid fuel uranium context. So you've got to untangle is it liquid fuel you're talking about or solid fuel? And that's where the things get ugly. Then you've got the proliferation issue. When you get Muppets who want to make nuclear weapons, and if there's more nuclear reactors and they're simpler to operate, does that mean we have nuclear weapons? And the answer to that is, I suppose, we've already got weapons of mass destruction being operated all around us without any sort of restraint at all. Biological weapons in particular, right? They're all over the world. And many nation states doing things that are irresponsible and are considered war crimes. And they're doing them anyway. And so there's this thing where we're already in an environment where there's massive weapons around us. And if humanity doesn't grow up and pull its head out of its ass, then we're dead. And that's not a case of nuclear proliferation. We're there now with what we're doing now. And so if we're able to maintain an energy source that can actually support some form of technology development, then we won't go backwards in terms of losing a lot of our existing knowledge. Because the vulnerability of going to a fully regenerated agricultural system is we won't have the time to maintain every single person dropping out for 20 years to get educated. And so you lose specialists. And that's one of the outcomes I think will happen. Most people are going to be involved in growing food, which, okay, great, you're connecting with nature now, and that's what we need to do, and we need to repair our relationship with nature. But a lot of our existing society will just fade away through misuse, lack of use, right? And we need an energy source to do that. We're also to the point where we're between ruin and the stars on multiple fronts, and one of them is socially, as in, what the hell are we doing with our technology? And like, we either grow up or put the matches back. That seems to be where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
If I may ask regarding, I could also go into this discussion regarding the future, but before I go into that, in previous panels you mentioned regarding the legal issues. So do you know how does the European Union and these sort of institutions look at thorium? Are they against it? Are they cautious about it? Are they willing? how does that? Because that's a whole different dimension than just the technical aspects of
So-
making one.
The incumbent, there's a massive school of thought that really doesn't like thorium. Right? The existing pro-nuclear crowd believe it's uranium, nuclear, and that's it. Thorium's not viable. We shouldn't talk about it. And that's not just coming from the incumbent industry. It's also coming from the activist front as well. When I was in Australia recently, 2 years running, I presented in Australia my work. They wanted to hear all about the mineral story, the mineral shortage, green transition. That part they wanted. They actually asked me not to talk about thorium. Right? They actually, it was a form of censorship. Don't talk about thorium. Take it out of the presentation. And their logic was they were trying to get Australia to go nuclear, and they wanted to actually go through a system that's already established. Don't muddy the water, and they weren't very nice about it either. And like Finland's already nuclear, and I see this as the next evolution of the nuclear industry. And so those groups I actually met in Australia, their fate is to be left behind. Now, as for Europe, from the legal point of view, because the World Nuclear Association is reluctant to hand out licenses for reactors, like they're doing it. Like there's multiple groups around the world that are getting those licenses, but they're really hard to get. And like Copenhagen Atomic recently had a thing where the Danish government decided not to actually sort of do a test inside Denmark of a thorium modular reactor. So now it's going to Switzerland. And if they don't get their act together, it's going to leave Europe entirely. All BRICS economies are pursuing this, and and in fact the Chinese are doing it now, and they're selling commercial power now. Right, and so it could be a case of the BRICS nations are going to leave the West behind. So legally there's this reluctance. They want to see something that's been demonstrated for 30, 40 years before they sign off on something new, all that shit. Meanwhile, in the background, every other energy system is crashing badly. Right, and so they either come up with something where they get out of their own way and they actually sort of start to be a bit more reasonable with how they actually apply these laws, or we get the full fragmentation. In which case, sucks to be you.
Iver, you had your hand up before me, please.
Yeah, I'm just reading.
You're
I
muted.
just read a classic science fiction book called
Iver, you're
Canticle
muted.
for Leibowitz. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but it definitely.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, the
So-
world. This is a world like 600 years after nuclear bombs were set off, and
Yeah.
not so fun. So yeah, I agree with Simon. There's all sorts of nasty things like kind of hanging out there, waiting for us.
It's yeah.
I would like to comment on that just because I read the book, and so my analysis is that it was a book about basically what if Judaism was the only religion and there was never any Jesus, and basically then it would be an endless cycle of vengeance and death forever, and that's basically what the book was, and so I would agree. Yeah, if you don't use forgiveness and love and compassion and you don't respect human rights, then yeah, you're not going to achieve a peaceful state of harmony and kindness and love for one another. And I think that's really an essential thing, that if we want to have a peaceful world, then we really need to make that a primary objective, that compassionate love for all creation, which is the basis of the human rights movement. And like it was like the whole United Nations Human Rights Declaration was written by Christian pastors from Canada, and so and I think that's really the direction forward. Like, say for instance, it's even in the Jewish Bible, the Micah 4:4, that everyone will sit under their own fig tree and their own grapevine. So the grapevine is the food, and the fig tree is food and firewood, and so and then and no one is afraid. And so basically, if everyone has enough land to grow their own food and firewood, then it's much easier to maintain a stable peace, because people don't want to go to war because they don't have enough resources. Oftentimes, who goes to war is people who cannot meet their basic needs. Like, for instance, in Western Africa, they often practice polygamy. And what that leads to is a large number of frustrated young men. And the frustrated young men often get together into tribes and then have war. So that's not really working for them. But if we do allow, people to have enough land, they can each have one wife and, their own kids, and it can work. We have enough land in the world, as I was showing in my my graphs earlier. Okay. I don't know if anyone else had a comment on that. Or
No, I got a random one for you.
okay, sure. What's this? Forest Journey, Role of Trees in Civilization, John Perlin. Cool.
That's a big book, hey? That's big.
Yeah. What's it about?
Oh well, it's one of the. It's called The Role of Trees in the Fate of Civilization. This is actually one of the ones that Steve St. Angelo referenced with regard to the historic.
I think I read that one.
Yeah, trees and production of charcoal, and how historically that's actually sort of influenced the fate of nations and all that. I'm putting together a story that every single human civilization is being supported by a series of resources, and when those resources change, the human system civilization changes. And these are fundamental structural things, and each one has a different resource. And so this is what the next generation of work that I want to put together is to actually sort of really among other things, nail this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I read that book. It was a good one. It's very similar to the presentation that Steve gave for us.
Yeah, that's everybody's information. That's why I got it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Regarding this topic, may I interrupt, Andre?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Also, sorry to you, Iver. In my computer it says you're muted, but it seems that everything's working. So something's wrong with my side of the conversation. Okay. Simon, thank you for explaining the thorium side. I actually contacted the Finnish Emergency Supply Center.
Okay.
I sent you a message regarding this dilemma. I'm not gonna publicly announce what we talked about, but so I called them and I talked with the leading analyst. I will not announce this person's name either. In any case, I called him and we talked for approximately an hour, and I asked regarding these things that we're talking about, peak oil and all, and then I asked what does he think. Has he read William Catron Overshoot? Has he read Limits to Growth? Has he heard about you, Simon, for example, and all? And in response, I got that these are dark things, but probably technology will solve everything. Yeah. So like, okay, that's quite bad. And then some book recommendations that I got was Hans Rosling, and so basically techno hopium, let's put it that way. In this term, after our conversation, I said if he doesn't mind, I'll send him a few links and some notes, and I sent the link to that book, A Forest Journey, and again the presentation with Steve St. Angelo regarding the collapse of complex Bronze Age societies, and then I said sent your information, Simon, and your publishings on GTK and some others. So hopefully that will rattle them a bit regarding this thing, because yeah, please.
I last year, last couple of years, I've been presenting this furiously. 2022 and the beginning of 2023, lots of groups within Finland in the government capacity wanted to hear what it was I was working on and the implications. And things went cold late 2023. Politically cold, and I've since worked out there are multiple lobbying groups that are actually attached to the investment community making money on solar panels and wind turbines and batteries, right? And they do seem to be, based in Denmark. There's like a whole cluster of them. They have been lobbying furiously to have me removed off platforms. And then formal complaints have been sent to GDK and the whole box and dice. And I think senior people in Finland, okay, they've heard my stuff, but they've been contacted and said, look, this guy's wrong. He's not peer reviewed. All is well. The sun is shining. Give us your money. And so everyone was back to being reassured and everything. Technology will save us. And so this is why I think my plans for the future, in particular with the Venus project, will operate outside the Western world and outside the BRICS economies. Finland is one of these countries that are doing quite well, but they are absolutely convinced they've got everything sorted. Everything's in hand. They know what to do. They're ahead of the game, swings and roundabouts, and all is well. And there's not a lot you can do with them. Right, there are so many beliefs and perceptions that are to try and sort of get past there. Some people understand, and there was a time when they were discussing it, and everything was fine. But I think we'll see when the papers come out, and they show the calculations, and then we'll probably have another round of discussion. But late last year, everything went cold, and so okay, let's see what happens.
Regarding this matter, there's a statue in Helsinki, in the middle of Helsinki, right next to the railway station, from one of our former presidents, Juho Kusti Paasikivi, and the quote goes, "The beginning of all wisdom is recognition of facts." And I think that has gone out the window. I saw your post regarding this other Finnish guy, Tuomas Malinen, taking his rants regarding this whole military occupation coming from the U.S. I'm not going to go into criticizing or mentioning that further, but it's something most Finns would abhor. To be honest, they would not listen to it at all.
They're not there. But procedure certainly was not followed. That I actually made some inquiries, and factually, I think he was correct. So again, we'll see.
No, I think there's so many things that I could go on what's going towards the woods instead of keeping on the right path, but we'll keep that to a private discussion some other time.
Run around, wave your arms, scream and shout. That seems to be what we're heading towards.
Yes, sir. Andre, please.
I have a question from a YouTube viewer. They have a 100 kilowatt turbine on a 3-meter drop large river, 5 meters per second source, and they were wondering if this would be sustainable for a local electric grid for a small town of less than 500 people.
Well, okay, so you got things like a mine site with a shaft, and you can have like a gravity thing that drops. And yes, you can generate electricity, but then you've got to get the weight up again. And so that there are ways you can do that. Maintenance of these things and how much electricity do they produce compared to the infrastructure needed. When you actually look at these numbers, there's a reason that's not happening now. Is it sustainable for a small country? I haven't done the numbers, but it's a system that you could probably do, and it would benefit the local community. Right, but whether it would be enough for a small city or a small town, I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking 100 kilowatts. I'm pretty sure. Well, that's not a whole lot. I don't know how much that would be for, but maybe even some minor industrial processes if you do it on a very miniature scale. Like I think personally that such reliable sources of energy like hydrothermal should be kind of reserved for industrial purposes, such as making solar panels, and then the solar panels would be used as residential, so that you could, like, say, connect with a radio or other low, and have your lights on, with LEDs, like a kind of low energy usage, and that would be kind of the sustainable route. That's my opinion.
Don't need lights.
No, I agree completely. I know in Africa and places like that, a small solar system where you just have solar panels and little LED lights makes a huge difference in small places like that.
Mhm. Yeah, because if you don't have lights, like Simon, like in Finland, in the winter, it can get very depressing because it's so long. The nights are so long, and you can't be productive when it's dark. And I know I've read like that indigenous people kind of like their main complaints is like that they have to sleep so long because there's just it's dark. They can't do anything. So lights really made a huge difference once we got them, and one of the great things now is that we have high efficiency lights, and so we can have the lights on for much longer and much lower energy intensity than we did before. I mean, possibly even like I don't know, but you know how they have those bicycle, like human
Yeah.
powered generators. I mean, those might be enough to power your LEDs. I think I saw a lady or a man in China, who they cut off his electricity, and he was just powering all of his stuff using a bike with some batteries.
Well, we have a small backup, I probably told you, a backup electricity system with one solar panel and a charge controller and a couple circuits. And that is fantastic because we had the lights go out for 2 or 3 days this last year because of a storm. And it was great to just have lights. It was the middle of the winter, actually, in January. We had lights. Actually, it was in December. We had music, with the radio and stuff. And, you could get around the house with our little LED lights and, just figure out a way to like exist. And we actually were doing great compared to, everybody else in the whole town. So it's worth having or figuring out.
Mhm.
Yeah.
ABC.
Regarding this whole meta crisis that we're facing, in my eyes, the biggest concern is just the sheer madness going on the political stage and all. And this is what William Rees has referenced, and he's citing The March of Folly by Barbara Tuchman, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. That's to me the scary part, because it seems that wherever you look, whatever's going on, nobody's discussing the real important things. It's strange that 4 random people across the world, for free, talk about these matters, and the views on YouTube are probably a few hundred. So to me, just it's sheer lunacy. And then there's the funny, great meme that with access to information, the common sense just drops out the window. So to me, I don't know how that's going to be solved, but it just seems that it's going to evolve into maybe more authoritarian at some point, and that's with the right rising. And I sort of understand. I would use it this way, that just so everybody understands, I have no quarrels with human beings. We're just all humans, but we have different cultures. So just to make it really, really simple, if your culture believes X is X, and then you have another person and their culture believes X is Y, you're going to have a conflict, and things are going to go south quite soon. And then when that denominator increases, it can be from what foods you eat or what clothes you wear or which god you pray to, it's going to become more disastrous. And with this whole thing that we've done in the past decades of having this humanitarian side to us, I think now it's going to sort of backfire with the diminishing resources and all the other chaos coming in. So I think we should definitely have political leadership, which should be able, should and could be able to speak some actual sense and reason, instead of it just seems that they're going around in circles and it's about the most nastiest person coming on stage being able to then spout some nonsense, instead of someone like Simon, who's an actual scientist and has the data and knows what he's talking about, and is trying to think about the bigger picture. So that's my highest concern, and I don't know if there's any initiative to maybe get this message through to these thick-skulled people up in these high positions.
We're touching on something here that is very, what's the right word here? I've been running on a series of opinions for a couple of years now. I can't prove this, right? But it seems like what we have become socially is we're human beings are a belief-based species. We choose what we believe, and that belief will dictate at a subconscious level what data we're allowed to look at and accept. And anything outside of that we will reject as fake news now, right? So that seems to be an aspect of what and how we are. In addition to that, I'm of the opinion now that the human global community has been subject to some kind of unconventional social conditioning where we have been convinced, and like at our emotional belief level has been edited to the point where groups of people will hold certain beliefs and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. You can't discuss stuff. It's not about the data. It's about their beliefs. And they'll get increasingly irrational because there was a time when you could sit down and have a discussion with someone. You can have these are the facts, and then you can come away from it and you think, right, okay, so my opinion now can shift based on what I have now seen, right? But the way we are at the moment is there's all these different tribes and they're in increasingly hardened positions. And there's not much you can do in terms of discussion. You're either in that tribe or you're not. And that is the case across the board, multiple areas. And I think it's actually a function of some sort of unconventional conditioning. Because it's like someone's been convinced to do stuff. But when people are backed into a corner with some facts, they tend to get very aggressive. And that's one of the signatures. Yeah, it's just an opinion, but that's what I think is happening. My stuff is data-based, which is why I've been allowed to survive as long as I have. But I'm still subject to the same thing of, someone will think of something. Technology will save us.
I just wanted to make a few corrections. That usually when we have Simon on, we have thousands of views. So Simon is a great guest here. But yeah, without when we have usually it's at least in the hundreds, or the low thousands, even without him. And because people are interested, there are a lot of people who are interested in the topic of transition. But I think that perhaps the answer is also somewhat that it's not for everybody. And that like it seems like we're going to have like a very large population decline, and maybe it's just those people who have decided they're going to get out through to the other side who are interested in this topic, and the majority of other people prefer not to think about what may be their own demise. And like I know I've spoken to many people personally who kind of where I've brought up the topic of my own self, and they're often like, oh, if the oil runs out, I'm just gonna kick the bucket. Like I don't want to be there. I'm gonna be dead. And it's like I was like, well, what if it happens in 10 years? It's like, well, I'm gonna die in my 30s. Well, whatever. That they don't care. They just don't want to experience a world where we don't have cheap energy. And where they would have to grow their own food and firewood or anything like that. And I find this is especially the case with people over the age of about 50, just because I guess strength declines and things like that. And in terms of politics, I think that most of our politics, it's not necessarily people being malicious, though I think certainly there are some people maybe in the background in very high up positions that do have some malicious intent. It's very difficult to gauge intent. And so you can never be certain of it. But a lot of it, if you read the history books, is simply inertia. It's simply, this is how we've always done things. Like, for instance, I remember just a few months ago, it was very popular to say, oh, this is what the Roman senators did. So we should do the same thing because this is what Rome did. But Rome collapsed. Rome collapsed doing exactly that thing, like a continuous war escalation, because eventually they ran out of resources, and that there was a, what do you call it, net energy loss. So the only time that war was a good thing for Rome was when there was a net energy gain. They'd conquered a new territory, and they gained new resources. But when it came to, in terms of maintenance wars, where they were doing wars in order to maintain their hegemony, they were no longer gaining any new resources, because they were just reconquering people who didn't like, having things stolen from them, that didn't have much to steal in the first place. That's basically after that Rome fell apart, because they were losing energy, and also it was because of this unsustainable way of life, which we are again seeing in Europe. Because, for instance, they were not they were existing based on imports, just like right now. The European Union exists almost entirely on imports. They only have 1 to 2 years of their own fossil fuels, or their own energy use available. Okay, Iver, you're muted, Iver.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention my own political experience. I ran for the legislature here in Maine, and I had a peak oil movie called Peak Oil: A Love Story, and it was on the internet. Anyway, and some of the opposition found the movie and pulled out a clip where I'm saying that snowmobiling is a completely unsustainable activity. And they spliced in Greta Thunberg saying, "How dare you?" And then I became a dangerous environmentalist.
Dangerous.
And then I knew that I wasn't going to win the election, but I had to keep limping. You know why they call it running for election? Because you're in a marathon and you just have to keep going all the way to the end. And so I kept going, and I did get 40% of the vote, but it was like unbelievable. So peak oil is not good for a political campaign.
And you did have to run.
And I did have to run. And I did actually, in fact, at one point, I did have to run because a guy got all worked up and he was like all ticked off at me and stuff. And he had a wrench in his hand. And so he was like, "Get off my property." And he was chasing me. And I didn't know if I could get to the van. So I jumped in my van and just decided, okay, my head is still there. This is good. And so it's an interesting experience being out there. And I'm glad I did it, but I'll never do it again. But now I'm trying to help out other local candidates. And we did convince a bunch of people to run and, help them out. And the local people are getting something called clean elections, which you can get here in Maine. And so we got one of our local candidates $25,000 in clean elections money, which I was really feeling good about. We were really feeling good about it. And then we found out that his opposition already has $50,000. So we gave him a chance anyway. So there's a lot of funny, weird little things out there. But I mean, if you want to, I thought, okay, if I could get in there, I could, introduce people gently to the idea of peak oil and try to help out our state. Anyway, thank you.
Politics, man, I don't have your patience, mate. I would make a lousy politician. I'd have to be nice to dead shits, and I just don't have the bandwidth. So I know someone's got to do it. Probably not me. Good for you, mate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just I wanted to comment on that. That Simon, you're totally right, and like I read that there's this great thing on the inappropriately excluded, I believe it was called. This is an article about IQ, and basically, very high IQ individuals are too high IQ in order to be understood by the general public. And so they cannot run for office because the things that they would say on the radio would just confuse the listeners. And so they would be canceled from the radio and no one would vote for them because they're like, what are they even saying? It doesn't make any sense. And so the people that run for office, generally that win, need to be 20% higher than the average IQ of the people electing them, because that is when they're most convincing. And so it's usually the high IQ people are best served in a position of advising the people who are the actual leaders. So the actual leaders, they won't necessarily understand everything, but they have a panel of experts that they can turn to in order to figure out what's going on. And they can translate what the experts say to the general public in terms that the general public may understand, not necessarily in the way that the experts may agree. But so it's kind of a broken telephone, but it's the only way we have of like communicating, other than like, I guess ChatGPT can also translate it. But we haven't had a AI based elections yet. But who knows? Maybe in the future we will have some kind of super intelligent politicians that use AI to make kind of messages that are tailored for the lower IQ general demographics that they can understand and find convincing. Okay. Milo? I mean, ABC?
No, it's okay. My identity is probably not that important yet. And
Okay.
there's a lot of... Okay, so I'm myself, I stand on the idea of monarchy. Not because I think that kings have any divine rights or so. It's just, if we look at through history, that's how it is. And as the saying goes, we never usually learn from history. So that's my stance. And then if things become more sporadic regarding our society, I do not see how democracy is going to be working. And on top of that, if this is what it has become, as it is today, I rather have one guy who I know is easy to dispose of in case of emergency, rather than have 300 people to find and do the same too. So, and also there's this guy called Hans Hermann Hoppe. He argues that, well, it's quite simple. If you have to sit here for life and then your child will be here for life, you have some sort of responsibility to think about that. Perhaps the future could be a bit better, instead of every 4 years or 8 years or whatever, something new happens and then the direction changes. Again, I know the Venus Project, and I really like the ideas of that Jacques Fresco presented. However, I just cannot see them being biologically sound, and especially when we have a complex society, it's just too many people. You cannot have this sort of universal appreciation for the rational.
So perhaps I should mention there is what I'm planning for the future is actually not the classic Venus Project, but an evolution of it. And I'm merging the Venus Project with the degrowth movement, right? Permaculture, regenerative agriculture, and I'm actually circular economy, all the stuff I've been looking at to shrink and simplify the industrial technology chain, learn how to run a city, a small city with fewer components, work out how to actually produce those components locally, what they look like, and then put it in a Venus city. And so it's actually it's an evolution of the original idea, where we're actually going to develop. The technology is developed, so I don't need to develop it. You just put the bits together and actually sort of in an unconventional sequence. And if it works, we've actually got a tool set to actually simplify the just-in-time supply grid from an industrial system. Then you put that in parallel with a regenerative agricultural system. So completely withdraw the industrial footprint from the natural environment. The waste plume is reduced to very little. And then we change our relationship with the planetary environment, then we change our relationship with each other. That's the plan. So yeah, that's a story for another day.
Sounds like a cakewalk.
So here's the thing though, if you go to a place where there's nothing, right, when you're going to build something from scratch, you're actually freed up, because what you build now all of a sudden is not that different to actually building the existing system, or just do something a little different. And and if you do something small and demonstrate that certain things are actually possible, I'm thinking about a community of 10,000 people. And so we're talking about a couple of, at the center, there's going to be an innovation hub, maybe 4 or 5 office blocks, a combination around that, our own power source, our own water source, harvesting raw materials from the local environment, and a network of pilot-scale industrial systems that are all, most of the ones I'm looking at, are already mature technology. So it's the innovative part of someone does it.
No, I
Yeah.
mean, I do see that it's a good idea, absolutely, and I hope everything in that regard works out as best as it can. I'm just rather skeptical of the whole world, and I mean,
that's a different matter. Most people won't look at these things, so I'm going to round up a group of like-minded people and disappear over the horizon, go set up in some remote area, develop something, spend 10 years developing the system, and I'll come back and we can do business. The rest of the world point blank refuses to acknowledge this stuff even exists, and so all right, we'll see who prospers then.
Oh, so Simon, just you were saying that here. I got this table here on Hawaii and the carrying capacity. There's this island Kaho'olawe where nobody is living. 90% of it is habitable, and it can support exactly 10,000 people. So you know that's an option for you. That there's a whole island where no one's living. But otherwise, I don't know if maybe it's a park or something.
So when I get to it, I've actually got to go through. There's a lot of things in Hawaii that you're not allowed to touch, right? For one reason or another, right? For example, they won't do geothermal because there's an indigenous native population that sees the volcano as a religious deity, and geothermal is drilling into the heart of Paola, right? So they're not going to allow geothermal. But there's lots of things like that, but a lot of the data you're putting up there, I've actually got to go through and actually sort of look at the origin of it. And so how much of it can I actually use, and can I use it in that context? And I was going to work with you and Gary on that. And then, then we'll actually sort of see for Hawaii, what will that look like? And then actually then apply it in a scenario. For example, the purple transition, I was just working on today. If we were to take the sewerage for 1.2 million people, right, and we were to actually put it through pyrolysis to make syngas, how much hydrogen would we be able to make? And then can we make ammonia from that? It turns out that is less than 1/10 of the ammonia needed if that ammonia was to do all domestic maritime shipping and domestic aviation. So these things work, but when you actually scale them up to quantity to hit the targets we've already got, all of a sudden you get trouble. And so now we're back to, should we do that, and should we do something else?
Yeah, basically, my transition plan, it calls for doing the sewage at the village level. Because
different methods, like then you turn it into methane, and then you cooking gas and
fertilizer.
And so I had this idea of, well, perhaps we could use the hydrogen to make ammonia from sewage. Okay, it's possible, but the quantities don't line up. So is that the sensible route? And should you use the sewage or something else like gasification, cooking gas and what have you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking, because we use 50% of our energy for food production. So, food production is extremely important, and having that closed loop for the fertilizer is really important.
Students with tweezers.
Students with tweezers?
The best energy source.
Yeah.
Students in a hamster wheel.
So, yeah, I just also had a kind of a backlog of things I want to mention.
Right.
Well, one was the monarchy Milo was mentioning, and he may be interested in looking into the Yamato monarchy of Japan. They've actually been in power for 2,680 years. So it can definitely be a very sustainable model if it's done properly. And then there was another thing. There was someone recommending Tuomas Malainen view on national security. I think that's about neutrality. And then there was someone talking about Taiwan and Audrey Tang, and they're big on digital democracy. And then someone was asking Simon if they have any ideas of where and when he will start this project. And then there was
Yes and
someone.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
So we're talking about the Venus project now. There is a plan in motion. There is a business model being developed. A few things have to be brought into line, and they're going to launch. And when we do a formal launch, then we want a situation where when we launch, people will contact the Venus project and say, look, great idea, I want to volunteer. And there's thousands of volunteers already. Now, there are a whole lot of tasks that we can allocate to people, but we're not organized at the moment to the point where we can actually allocate people to those tasks and then capture the results that come back in. So it's premature. So I'm hoping, well, I was actually hoping to launch this a couple of months ago. And so we've been delayed. It could happen any time and all that. Once we launch, then there'll be a fundraising drive. And then there's a series of steps and stages we've got to go through. I'm from the industrial world. And so I know that we've got to use the tools of this world to build the next one. And these things cost money, like lots of money. And so we're talking capital now. So that capital has to be raised in a way that is not an antagonistic conflict with the philosophy of the project. But we've also got to somehow connect with the vision of Jacques Fresco, which I now see as a target in the future. What I'm trying to do is a stepping stone between here and there. As to where, there are about 6 sites around the world which are useful. And one of them, as it turns out, is in Hawaii. But nothing is actually signed, nothing is organized. The site that I actually like the best happens to be in South America, because the primary target I'm trying to hit is to actually get a thorium reactor on the ground. And so I want to be remote, away from human population. I want to be not be interacting with the water table. There's a few things like that, but I also want natural resources around me, like volcanic ash and rocks of a certain kind. And so there's a list to be looked at. Once the money hits the ground, we can have a proper conversation about where this is going to go. But let's just say, if all goes well, South America.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
South Peru, right?
Are you planning, Simon, to make Roman concrete?
So
with the volcanic ash, I mean,
we've got to replace concrete. So the problem is cement is very energy intensive to make, and then sand to make concrete with is getting harder to source because the environmental restraints won't let us harvest the sand. So one of my colleagues at GTK was actually looking at geopolymers, where we can actually sort of take rocks of a certain ratio of aluminium and a certain ratio of certain elements, right? And some rocks are suitable, some are not. And if you merge that with volcanic ash, you can make a geopolymer. And it's not quite the same as concrete. It takes longer to set, but once it's set, it's comparable and in some cases stronger than concrete. And you couple that with a whole lot of unconventional building materials. And I was hoping to do a construction lab, and yes, I was going to replace what concrete is used for. I was going to replace it with something else. And if we can harvest that from the local environment using tools with a value chain that we control directly, that was one of the things to do.
Yep. Was it going to be in South Peru?
So that was one of the sites we were talking at, but there are problems with the site. So there's another site in South America I'm now looking at. So the problem, there's a few legal problems with that site because it may be tasked to something else now. The owners of that site are under pressure to do multiple things with that, and we are taking too long to get our business case together, and I think they might be committing to something else now. So we don't know.
Yeah, because did you know there was a kingdom of southern Peru, of South Peru?
Mm-hmm.
I actually got a coin from that area, the South Peru, and it was just brief. It was a very brief very short-lived colony, but it had a big volcano and I don't know, a llama or something on it. It was pretty cool. It was from like 1837.
But Peru is one of the places I like to look at. It has a number of advantages, a couple of disadvantages too. But everywhere it does. If I could do it in Peru, I would. But there's a few things that 3 hurdles we've got to get past that might make it impractical, and we may end up going somewhere else. Doesn't matter. There are lots of sites around the world that are suitable, and there are lots and lots and lots of people who will be interested in putting this up once they see the business model. It will happen somewhere.
Yeah.
Andre, please.
Oh, yeah, I would just wanted to share some of the peak oil chat group info here. So there's Japanese fuel shortage, so the peak oil is happening. And then an interesting example is this Cuba and USA. This is from 10 years ago. Cuba's actually doing even better now. They have a lot higher life expectancy than the U.S. I think because the U.S. has fallen, and then they have a better infant mortality, and they're still using less energy. So their potential kind of usable model in terms of they use like horse and buggy for their energy needs. I don't know if Simon, if you've looked into that at all, the Cuban model.
Yes. So Cuba was 10 years ago when I was just looking at peak oil. I had a whole series of case studies, and Cuba was one of the very few success stories. So 1991, I think it was 91, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the source of oil to Cuba stopped. And the United States, being the United States, applied a naval embargo to, that'll teach them. And so overnight, they went from a petroleum-based economy to almost no petroleum at all. And they had to reinvent themselves. A lot of people starved to death. Like, it wasn't a pleasant evolution, and most people lost a lot of weight. But they were an educated population. They were also behind their government, and so when the government came up with a plan, everyone got behind that government, and they applied that plan in the face of adversity. And they pulled together as a community, and it worked. So now they grow their own food, and the level of education was still actually maintained pretty high. Like they were able to train lots and lots of medical staff. That when there were various emergencies in South America, they could send out whole teams of medical staff to assist other countries, which, if you think about it, should seriously embarrass the rest of the world that we're going to behave this way to blockade a country like that. Anyway, so yes, I have looked at Cuba. It's one of the success stories, but again, like all such stories, some things weren't so great, and it required people to be disciplined to get through it, and it required radical social change.
Yeah, I know the U.S. is trying to do a similar embargo of Russia with similar results. Like Russia is now a high-income earning country, whereas before they were a middle-income earning country. So they're doing extremely well from these embargoes, and the U.S. You were just going down.
There's a big difference between embargoing Cuba that didn't have any fossil fuels and embargoing Russia that has lots. So that's also true. It didn't work too well. But Cuba is, kind of its own little spot. Was able to figure out some things and they did a lot of urban agriculture. So they grew a lot of their food right inside the cities themselves. So it was a pretty amazing sort of turnaround. They were able to do things, So it's an example to the rest of us, kind of, but maybe in these higher, more technologically advanced places, it would be hard to do it.
Milo?
Yeah. As a Finn, speaking about Russia is always a sort of concerning matter. people usually start becoming red in the face and look like rabid dogs having having rabies, foam coming out of their mouth.
Yeah, yeah.
Kill those bastards. That's the first thing, and nowadays especially. I've been trying to follow a bit. I'm not gonna make any claims that I know what I'm talking about, but just to open up a bit, perhaps from the usual Russia bad perspective. So, what has been said is, as the U.S. it's a military-industrial complex. The whole economy is, well, not the whole economy, but it's built upon wars. Russia, of course, I don't think anybody's going to defend that they're nice guys, and it's a superpower, so they do what they do. But it's in its core still not. That's not the idea. It's not to make profit. It's just to sort of keep your nation working somehow. And of course, with the vast amount of resources that they have quite the advantage, and huge landmass, a rather small population considered how big the country is. And then when looking at the speeches and how they present themselves, it seems that the leadership of Russia articulates quite well how they think, versus when you look at how Western politicians or leaders talk about it. It's just shocking to really see how sort of the difference is like night and day. And then it seems that the sort of support for their own government, even though it sounds a bit absurd to say, it's quite high on with our eastern neighbor. And I think on the whole Western hemisphere, it's sort of decreasing day by day. So it's really strange. I mean, if somebody would have said this 10, 20, however years ago, everybody would be, no, this is not happening. It's impossible. But now it's just it's strange. So we sort of, the West has backfired with its own actions, and now this is the result. So we have China, Russia, India, and the BRICS coming together, and they're strong, really strong. And as Simon said in the previous panel, that the Chinese are playing Go, and the Russians are playing, I don't know what they are, and the West is playing chess. No, wait, what was the
it's just a thing I blurted out that I talk to groups every now and then. It just struck with that the people in Europe certainly don't understand China at all. Now, the West likes to think it's playing chess, but actually it's playing checkers.
yes.
We're doing dumb stuff, right? Our opponents in Russia, who are not our friends, but they don't have to be our enemies either, right? They're playing chess, right? But the Chinese are playing Go. And the long-range problems for Russia is to avoid being absorbed by China. So they've actually got the same problem we do. And if we were to put aside our differences and just look purely from a resources point of view, Russia and Europe should merge together. Russian natural resources and European technology should merge together, and that could be a power block that could balance China. Otherwise, we're going to get eaten piecemeal. That's not a very popular opinion, as it turns out, but
Yeah, I can think if I'd say that to anyone, then they would chop off my head.
yeah, that lots of people do have a problem with a lot of my ideas.
That's why I like you, Simon.
What do you do?
I agree with you, Simon, that would be a good idea, but it seems more realistic well, I mean, the way things are going is that the
Give more a
BRICS,
chance.
yeah, well, the BRICS nations are uniting, and
Yeah.
so Russia is more likely to unite with like China, and
I already have.
They already have. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that seems to be the way it's going. And then I think it's kind of like what we're going into now it reminds me of the Western Europe Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire, and where the Western Roman Empire fell into a dark age, and then the Byzantine kept going, and that seems to be what's happening. And then I also wanted to comment on Milo's observation, how it seems like the people in the Eastern, like Putin, is like he's kind of like very coherent and speaking for himself, whereas a lot of the Western leaders, they don't seem like they're speaking for themselves. They seem more like puppet leaders. And so I think that this is kind of exactly going to that article I was talking about, where in general the highly intelligent people are usually in the background. And I think that in the West, they've tried to create puppet leaders that will do exactly as they say, but that hasn't worked out very well for them, because it's so obvious that their puppet leaders are just so incompetent. And like, you know, whenever they go on stage, like it's just their incompetence is just obvious. And because the Eastern leaders like Putin was never really a politician. He got appointed to be president by his predecessor, Yeltsin. Right? Before that, he was the head of the KGB, and so you know, there was like a 3-month campaign, and then since then it's just been authoritarian rule, more or less. You know, like they have democracies or whatever. You know, like he has popular support in his nation, in terms of the actual people. But he's also a very smart guy, and he's never done the classical campaigning with like rhetoric. He just does the like he goes to a place and he shakes hands with and holds the babies, and that's his campaigning. And then Xi is a technocrat, right? He rose up to power through his intelligence over the other people. So these are genuinely intelligent leaders, and perhaps that is the way of the future. But I don't know if and when that may come to the West.
Maybe not in the U.S.
Okay.
Especially lately. Yeah, not so much.
Yeah, like the debate. I don't know if everyone's seen it. You know.
Oh my God, it was painful.
Yeah, Biden was fumbling over all this.
It was
Okay,
painful, and it was all stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, both sides. All right, Milo, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember seeing Art Berman on one sort of YouTube podcast, and he was talking about this Russia thing, and this is what he sort of said, that if we forget about the good or the bad ethical side, we just look at what we sort of know. The Russian leader supposedly has a PhD in energy economics, and if that is true, that is quite wild. And even if it's not true, let's say somebody wrote it for him or something, he still probably has some idea about the matter. That already explains quite a lot, if you think about it that way. And then regarding the whole, so that's just the one section regarding this, what you said, Andre. And then to quote regarding the whole mess of politics from the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I, I'm the last ruler of the old world. My duty is to protect my nation against politicians. I think he summarized it quite well. Of course, let's not. I'm not going to elevate him as being a sort of a savior or a good guy. I mean, all emperors and kings and queens and nations have had their strife and war, but I think the quote was well summarized regarding the situation that you should have when you're in that position.
There are no good guys.
There's only guys who are powerful and they choose to do good, and there are people who don't have power and they're harmless, and there are people who have a power and they will do a lot of bad stuff, and then some in between.
We're an inflection point between the fall of one empire and the rise of another, and in that environment there are no good guys. None.
I mean, I think it would be so amazing to see somebody rise up and speak and say, we have these problems, and just list them and say, it's the problem of too many people consuming too much stuff. And now we can sit here and squabble, or we can do something about it like reasonable people before we're gonna have to face the consequences of our previous actions. And also our future children, if one has children, will also face them. And I think everyone would then agree that it would be better to do something about it rather than just keep on going as before, which is, well, headless, to say the least.
Yeah, that's a good point. In terms of where we're going and all that. I had a YouTube comment here. Land power versus naval power. The U.S. will never abide a united Eurasia, and I was just thinking that, well, it's not really up to them at this point because they have less resources than the others. Than Eurasia.
Naval power has always been the thing that held everything together. I mean, you think about it, the Portuguese were the first with a worldwide empire, then the Spanish, and they basically were the naval power. And then you moved on to the, even the Dutch to some extent, and the English, of course. And now it's, the US general thing. The Navy is much more important than anybody, understands. It's much more the reason that, you hold up your empire is you hold it up with naval power. And I don't know, who knows what the next big empire will be. But it was interesting that when they shifted from coal to oil, that kind of shifted the balance of power to the U.S. from England.
Yep.
And when they shifted from sail to coal, that of course shifted it from, well, it was a little after when Spain and England got into tussle, but it was sometime around then, these different power sources. So the next power source might be, I don't know, can you put a thorium reactor in a ship?
We
that
can.
might be it.
Yeah.
Well, you can, but there are limitations of what you can actually do then. Yes, you can put a thorium reactor in a ship, and that's probably what's going to happen to keep maritime shipping going. But then, can you launch an aircraft off the deck of an aircraft carrier with just thorium? The answer is no.
Well, no, but what do you call it? Aircraft have become kind of ridiculous anyway. I think most of these wars nowadays are drone wars. I think a lot of them are done with drones. And so that's a very different thing. And a drone can be much lighter and different. And, it just changes the whole thing. And apparently these ships are not as much aircraft carriers as they are a multi-platform sort of a thing that you can launch also to drones and project power in different ways. So I think it's the world changes, and then whatever that new power is that figures that out, they become the naval, and they also become the economic power, etc. At least that seems to be the case for the last 5,000 years anyway. And it's all about teaching people to sail. If you could teach them to sail. Today I took out a bunch of kids, and it was really fun. I just want to get them hooked. So what I did is I started them on this thing called Get the Noodle. And I have like a swim noodle. And the swim noodle sticks out the back of the stern of the boat. And they have to get the noodle. So they all like fight and maneuver and stuff and try to get the noodle. And I just want them to have like a really good time. And now next week I'm going to teach them more about how to move the boat a little more formally, But, I think you got to get, you want to figure out how to make the world, work in the future. I think it's got a lot of it. In my opinion, I always talk about this. My opinion has a lot to do with the ocean and controlling commerce on the ocean. And, a lot of it's going to move by wind, I think. Anyway, we'll see.
Yeah, it's difficult to speculate now. Historical civilizations have had a broad range of technologies, but usually a new transportation technology is often coincident with the expansion of an empire. For example, the first and the largest, perhaps in history, was the Indo-Aryan expansion, when the North Eurasian horse tamers had brought the it to the horses to the Urals, where the Aryan people were living at the time, and the Aryan people had developed the wheel, and then there were the chariot wheels with horses, and that allowed them to expand all the way from India, from Central Asia down to India, and take over much of the Indian subcontinent, as well as all the way to Britain, which has yeah. And so that was the largest expansion, and then we had the most of the Mediterranean powers were sail powered, like Rome and its predecessors, the Phoenicians, and so yeah. But we may also have the world is going to get bigger as energy gets more expensive. The world will get bigger. I know I had a question here on will space power and AI obviate naval power. I don't see that happening, simply because at least not immediately, because I think that what we're going for right now is a contraction phase. So if there's going to be an expansion phase, it's going to be after the contraction. This whole transition from cheap energy to sustainable energy is going to be very big, and it's going to make the world very big. Uh, and so people are going to be more interested in things are going to, like, the big countries may crumble into smaller countries, like the US may not be able to sustain itself as a large power, and may become several sub-regions and things like that. But we'll have to see. It's very difficult to speculate.
Yes.
Yeah. Hmm.
What I'm concerned is we already seen the farmers in Europe protesting, and I haven't seen it myself, but what I've noticed, at least on the social media side, that it was quite wild, really quite wild. Nothing too atrocious or anything like that. However, it was still many people with their machines and blocking and so forth. So once the fertilizers and diesel and all that becomes less available, that part of growing food is going to be difficult. And even if we transition, here's the thing that I'm most concerned about. Let's say even if we organize, okay, we have to do this. So a lot of people will move to the countryside, and we will be somehow able to make the transition. Then the soil quality and building up that soil, as you, Andre, surely know, is the key to everything. How long is that going to take? Because it's not something you can, let's transition tomorrow and, we have organic tomatoes coming. No, I mean, you've already depleted the soil. So building that up is going to take, I don't know how many years. So to me, and then of course the whole economic system on top of that, when that starts to crumble, it's just, it's going to be a wild ride, really wild ride. I do not want to think about it further. It just it really saddens me in so many ways.
I just wanted to address that, and then also a viewer question about who or what is working on criterion-based mapping of best human migration, habitation, future climate materials, and constraints. So one of the issues with doing such a map would be that then everybody would go there. So basically right now it's more or less kind of a free-for-all, where, like I was saying earlier, it's those people who are interested in surviving the collapse who have to do the work now in order to prepare themselves and potentially their future families for transition later. And this would require them to go to a more rural region. Like I moved to a rural county, where we're like at 50% of carrying capacity in the county. And then I know lots of people who have large amounts of land, and we're very good friends. We have many meals together and things like this. And then, I'm also participating in my own agriculture, because the transition time for a person to learn to grow their own food is 5 years. So to answer your question, Milo, like you kind of got to get started even on your windowsill, and then look at moving to a more rural location if you are in an urban location now. I know, mysteriously, even though Finland has large amounts of land, but for some reason you guys are very concentrated into very, very small population centers, and that's not healthy long term. And it's very concerning to me that your leadership is not aware of like, even though you guys have that future institute for the future, it doesn't seem like they're paying it any heed, and they're not doing the land distribution that would be necessary in order for you to maintain your population into the future.
Oh, you have to remember they're optimized for the way life is at the moment. The system is at the moment, they've optimized that to the best, which that is correct. They have, and it is remarkable.
Oh, okay.
So the way the existing system, you've got like a highly educated population embedded in pristine wilderness with non-fossil fuel energy supporting heavy industry. That the combination is very rare. That's the way things are now. So if the boundaries shift and we change, then yes, society will have to change, and no one's going to like it, but they're going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Milo, did you have a response to that as well?
Yeah. So the emergency supply center in Finland, which is, I would dare to say, probably the most advanced regarding these sort of crisis situations, they say that their mission is to keep things going. So they have oil for 5 months, and they have medicine for, I think, 6 months, and food for up to a year, and so forth. And that's the idea. So as I called this person whom I spoke to, and I asked, have you thought about 100 years from now? No, we don't do that. And I said, okay. Then I asked, wouldn't that probably be quite useful, and make these situations clear and prepare for them? Then the response was that it's economically unavailable. To really prepare a nation fully for this sort of situation would be quite expensive. However, I don't think the plan would be expensive, just to make the theoretical steps to it. How to make it in practice is a whole different matter entirely. But again, it seems that there's political issues going on. This person even said to me that you have quite dark thoughts and dark subjects. So I said, yeah, but I'm less than 30. I'm going to live through this if I'm going to be 100. So I'd rather have a plan. And if I'm ever going to have children, which I'd like to have, even though I know we have an overpopulation crisis, I'm just talking about my own selfishness.
But
here,
not in Finland.
Yeah, well, I don't think I can take this card like, oh, we have this many people in Finland, so all these other whatever nations can perish because you screwed up. So I have this sort of I don't know how to react to that. That's my selfish. I'd like to have kids, but I don't know.
You have to remember that the system here works very well in the current circumstances, and we're optimizing things. It's only now that we're starting to have trouble for the first time in the last 10 years, and that's associated with the medical system. Like they're still struggling to get that stable again. But I used to attend briefing meetings every now and then that were run by the government. It was a series of conferences that get members of the staff member of the government to talk to each other about how things are going, and what sorts of things are we looking at. And it was just like an information thing. But I went along to a couple of these, and it blew me away of how butt ignorant they actually were. Right? They had
no shit.
They have no concept at all of the polycrisis that's in front of us. And there was like a panel of 8 people, and only one person said something even remotely related to reality, as in how energy and our resources for batteries, for example, have to come from raw materials, and we don't know what that is. Everyone else was talking in terms of, we're looking at making a better society where more people could have more leisure time to do, to improve the work-life balance, and we can sort of make a more inclusive society there where everyone is happier, and I go, holy shit, these are our leaders.
Yeah, I
know
don't
how
think
you
they
feel.
could talk about it. I don't think they could talk about it at all. I mean, because if you're like sort of on the Titanic and it's heading for trouble, then I don't think you can really talk about it that well because you're going through the iceberg area, iceberg alley, but you can't really tell everybody because then
I,
everybody panics.
that may well be the case. I do believe there's a group of people who are looking at the long-term strategy of things, right? And they would be working with a national security clearance, and they would have absolutely no business telling people with no national security what they're really doing. I don't have a security clearance. I'm not attached to such information. I don't want to be because it comes with strings attached. I'd have to, wipe my internet history. So,
Well, I'm pretty far from anybody listening to me at all. But what do you think, Milo?
I'm I'm thinking how much I'm going to share about my personal life. But let's put it this way: I know I'm in a privileged position, and not just because I'm Finnish. I have other reasons. I could tell you that in private, but in public, I want to keep that away.
Fair enough.
Okay. And
Well,
with this, I've felt terrible. I've been to the doctors, depression, anxiety, and I think that I'm going insane. Every day I'm thinking I'm going insane because what I'm seeing is just everything I see, I have to look at it really critically. I don't care if it's things or people. If it's an abstract concept of culture or how we actually do things, how food is delivered to the store. And then what's going on the bigger stage and how to get there. So for example, if you want to engage in politics or get into a position of power, you have to go through these steps, you have to go through the grind. That takes a lot of time. And even then, you still don't have much to do. You're limited as everybody's pulling your strings somewhere. So my thinking is, okay, well, we have this problem. We know it's coming. And few people are willing to really engage in this critically, really go down the rabbit hole. And this is my conclusion that I came to. As Nietzsche would have stated, or did state, that if you look into the abyss, at some point the abyss will look back at you. And that's where I've come into. So I have sympathy for people who are intelligent and people who are willing to care, but I don't have sympathy for people who don't. And most people go into this category. So that's already 99%. This
like people only.
Yeah, and most people, if I say this, they will look at you like you're crazy. They think you're evil. I'm like, no, I'm not. If we really lay down the basic fact, we go look at prehistory, for example, the megafauna, and then we go through the steppes and civilization. You have these different layers, and when you peel them off, you come to these strange conclusions. So what I've been thinking is, okay, I have this information. What can I do? And I've had the privilege to meet Simon in person. I've had the privilege to now be here to talk with Simon. And I know your thoughts and future prospects regarding this Venus evolution. I think they're great, and I really hope that they become something. I'm just looking at the world. It's quite hard to not be cynical about it. So in any case, it all comes down to, okay, what can I do? And I'm really trying to think, what can I do? And I've come to 3 solutions. Either you try to get into a position of power, let's say government or something like that, or you get a lot of money. You just go full-on capitalist and get as much wealth as you can and buy as much as land as you can. You just try to hoard. And then with that, you have the position to leverage. Let's say, okay, I have land. Please come here, do this, do that. And third is just you do whatever you want to do. You enjoy life and worry about things as they come. I still haven't decided which I'm going to take, but I have this strong sense of duty although I don't think anybody will listen to me, and nobody will care because I don't have the credentials to that. In any case, it's a tough spot to be in, and yeah, I'm not gonna share further. But please, Andre, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think you're in a great position where you are, and so I was where you were at some point, a little ways back. And so what I did is I moved to a rural polity of within a sustainable carrying capacity, and the city I am in is 22,000, and the county is like less than 100,000. And so basically I'm here. Like when I arrived, there was some grumbling and complaining, just like from the general populace, and I came here like spreading forgiveness, love, and kindness, like in every interaction, and helping just kind of like raise the general kind of feeling. Like to give an example, like the home hardware, they get to pick their own retail. Well, when I got here, they had like a bunch of jokes. Well, they were kind of on the dark humor side. But now, in terms of like their merchandise, but now when I go into their store, their merchandise says "Be kind." Like it's about kindness and love, and like those kinds of things. You repeat them enough to enough people, and then it kind of spreads. That information spreads, and like a lot of the things that people used to ask me when I got here, now they already know that. That's already part of their baseline understanding. And then another thing is that I attend the Gray County Council on a fairly regular basis. I don't always attend it. But I know all of the mayors. I know all the mayors, and I email them on a regular basis. And so, even though I'm not a politician, but I kind of like advise them and help them with their current situations. And so, you could do the same thing, like if you wanted to, and then you can be of service to the community. And I think that it would be worthwhile for you to have a wife and kids and all those things, because like when we that there's been many climate catastrophes in the past, and what usually happens is that just before the climate catastrophe, you have a large number of specialists that are hyper specialized into various areas, and then when you actually have the collapse, what happens is that you have a transition towards generalists, and so because the generalists manage to survive the collapse, and so you may be one of those generalists that sees it coming and is able to adapt to it and be of service to others, and so I think it's worthwhile that way. Well, we got 2 minutes left, guys. So perhaps some
Just wanted to
closing
say
remarks.
one little thing. Yeah, do what you can. I mean, I kind of know about the sea level rise coming up. So I worked with some people here on this island here, and we're trying to get a group, get a study together and things to raise a road, because otherwise it's not going to work. So if you know things, and don't harp on it, just sort of tell them, try to get somebody to listen a little bit. And they kind of have begun to understand here that if you don't raise that road, we're not going to have half the island. So I don't know. I think you just do what you can, figure out what you can do, and just start helping out. I'd rather do action than worry about it all. I mean, sea level's coming up. There's no way you can stop it.
If I may say a final thing regarding the sea and you, Iver, about sailing. We just had, I put on our private chat this long, tall ray ships. So
Yeah.
I went to check out these ships, and I went to this Ecuadorian ship, which is part of the Ecuadorian Navy, where they train naval officers. They traveled from Baltimore, or sailed from Baltimore to Helsinki, and they said it took 22 days to do that. 22 days.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful ship. Not completely wooden. They had metal masts, and it was a metal hull and all that. It was
Sure.
And I think they had a crew of 150 people.
Wow.
150 people. And then I didn't ask about the cargo. And again, it's a training ship. But I would find it very interesting to know how much cargo they can ship and put into such a vessel.
I'm sure tons.
If they re-equipped it, I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Things are changing.
So there was one final thing on the agenda was to schedule next time, because I think the lead time was too short here, and Steve didn't end up being able to make it because he's traveling right now, and Kevin Hester forgot to set his alarm clock. It seems like. So I was thinking, can we schedule something in 2 or 3 weeks, Simon, or
Let's
or
see.
3 or 4, whatever's comfortable for you.
Could we do it? Okay, I'm working with the Club of Rome in the last week of August.
Cool.
Nice. So did you want to do second week of August?
Can we do second week of August?
So the 7th?
No, that would be that's the first week in August.
Oh, okay. I thought the first was the 1, 2.
7th or the 14th. 7th or the 14th.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's aim for the 7th now, and if that doesn't work out, we'll go for the 14th. How about that?
On the 15th, I'm actually taking part in an inquiry into EVs for Australia Parliament.
Cool.
Okay.
Stuff like to prepare for that. So
Okay, so I think
7th is
7th
ideal.
would be better.
But flexible. And
Okay.
could you actually send me a meeting invite this time that actually
Okay.
automatically goes into my calendar? 'Cause,
Okay, I will. An ICS file, is that what it is?
Yeah, something like that. Problem
Okay,
is,
I will make an ICS file, and
So-
then
I've got about over 120 to 150 emails a day, and when
Okay.
things get hot for work, there's up to like 30 or 40 meetings a week.
okay, I'll send it in the chat and on email.
Yeah, okay. Cheers.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Same time?
Yep.
Because this is Hawaii and a lot of things compatible.
That's good for me. We'll
Yeah.
see what everyone else thinks.
All right. Okay, so without further ado,
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. We leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one infinite creator. Adonai Pasabranos. All right.
Thank you.
I ended the stream. All right.